in the soot-choked hills of Banska Tjavnica, Slovakia, behind the scorched bell tower of St. Carol's Seminary. An attic door was nailed shut in 1913 after 3 novices vanished during a blizzard last year. Restoration crews found it. Inside, a child's diary bound in altar cloth, each page smeared with hymns written in ash, and please signed simply, "I'm still here." The church declared it unsuitable for the public and sealed the seminary archives until 2131. But I've obtained the full transcript never before released. If you're ready to uncover what even the clergy couldn't cleanse, type "I'm ready" in the comments. They came for the bell. Not because it rang though it did, but because it shouldn't have. There was no rope, no mechanism, no wind. The clapper had been removed in 1956, and yet every morning, just before the frost lifted from the graves of the novitiates, the bell in the attic tolled once, not mournful, not loud, just enough to make the men look up from their ladders and pretend they hadn't heard it. Matej was the first to mention it aloud. A younger mason, brought in from Trnava, raised by his grandmother, God-fearing and near blind. He said the bell sounded like it was underwater. Then, quieter, "It rings like someone with no mouth." The others laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was better than silence. The abbey had too much of that already. The attic had been sealed with 12 nail sticks on each door, hand-forged and blessed, though no one remembered by whom. There was no key, only the hymn etched above in scorched Latin, where the wood had blackened in lines, not from fire, but from ash rubbed in by human fingers, old ones, small ones, a child's maybe. They argued for hours whether to open it, but the scaffolding shook again the next day, and the next, and on the 4th morning they found a rosary outside the door, melted into the floorboards. The beads weren't pearl, they were teeth. They pried the nails loose just before dusk. The sun hung low behind the bell tower, bleeding amber through the cracked rose window, casting fractured light onto the faces of the workers as they strained. The door groaned open, as if held by breath. A thick warmth hit them, not the warmth of bodies, but of milk gone sour, of something once wholly gone. Still, not heat, exactly, but presence. Inside, the soot clung to the rafters like cobwebs, whispering down with every footstep. The smell was unmistakable. Candle wax, burnt cloth, something beneath it, too metal perhaps, or old milk turned sweet. The air was too quiet, so quiet it seemed to pull sound out of them. Even the creak of the wood felt distant, like a memory of a noise, not the noise itself. Jehan, the foreman, stepped first. He was not devout, but his wife had miscarried in spring, and since then he'd carried a folded baptismal cloth in his breast pocket like a relic. When he entered the attic, he touched it without knowing. His fingers grazed the linen, and something cold flickered behind his eyes, a room too familiar. A crib turned toward a window, a bell swinging without sound. The attic was not empty. In the center stood a small altar, makeshift, the kind children build when they mimic adults. The wood was wrong firewood, really, and the cloth covering it had once been white. Now it bore the stains of years, pressed handprints darkened into the fibers, not placed, but dragged. And there, atop it, lay the diary. It should have been dust. It wasn't. It was bound in red altar cloth, corners burnt. The pages inside were not paper, but sheets of vellum coated in soot, each one pressed with fingers. No ink, just ash, written letter by letter in what must have been days of silence. The cover bore no name, only a cross, inverted, but drawn by a child who had not meant it that way. Crooked, careful. Reverend Jehan opened it. He should not have. The first page read only, "They told me not to cry where God could hear." The second, "If I am still, I am holy." The third was smeared, but a phrase repeated at the bottom in shakier strokes. "I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here." He didn't turn more. The room had grown colder, but not in temperature, in weight, like something had noticed, like silence had become a listener. Behind them, the bell rang once. No clapper, no movement, just the sound, soft and wet, like a heartbeat in a cup. Matej vomited, not from fear, but recognition. The bile came with blood. He hadn't eaten that day, not since morning prayers, but he swore he could taste milk on his tongue. Thick and warm and wrong. Jehan did not speak. He could not. He stood staring at the altar, as if seeing something still seated, their shape made from folded cloth and memory. A small back, a collar, a child's neck, bowed in penance. But there was nothing, only soot, only ash. They closed the door again, not with nails, not this time. Only the hymn, which they repainted with the ash from the floor, one letter at a time, a ritual made from panic. The rosary teeth were gone, so was the warmth. The room felt hollowed, as if it had finally exhaled. Back outside, the scaffolding swayed, though the air was still. The cracked icons along the stairwell watched in silence. Eyes faded. Gold leaf flaked away like dried skin. One had wept once, according to local record. Oil from the eyes, 1913. Same year the novitiates vanished. Coincidence, said the diocese. But some coincidences rot when left too long in wood. The diary was taken, not by any of the workers. It was simply gone when they returned the next day. In its place, a single page, pressed to the altar by a wax seal that had no crest, only a child's thumbprint. Fresh, the soot made the words difficult, but they read them anyway. I wrote it backwards so he couldn't read it. J.N. left the job. Matic would not enter the building again. The others stopped saying the word bell. It was easier not to name what continued without permission. 3 days later, the snow returned, though it was early in the season. Heavy, wet, too warm to stay. It melted in sheets, ran black through the eaves. Inside the attic, no one entered, though the seal had been broken. Still, the bell rang. Once each morning, not loud, not mournful, only enough to make you wonder if it had ever stopped. From the Seminary Preservation Board, 2024, no clergy have entered the attic, not since the ringing resumed. The attic had no windows, but there was always light, thin, colorless, the kind that seemed to bleed through, would rather than come from any sun. The restoration team didn't return that week. The site was marked condemned by someone who never signed the ledger. The key went missing. And yet, the attic door opened again, quietly. No nails, no hymn, only the sound of pages turning where no one stood. It was Sister Benedicta who found page 4. She had come alone, without blessing, in the hours before matins. She said she was checking on the linen stores, but her hands trembled over her veils, hemmed the entire walk to the stairwell. She knew that corridor from childhood. The faint soot stain across the archway, the sound of breath behind icons. She'd gone silent for 2 years once. In her novitiate claimed it was for God. The priest who'd guided her died of smoke inhalation the year after. No fire, just soot in the lungs. She did not knock, only crossed herself, then turned the knob. The attic door gave way without protest, as if it had always been waiting. Inside, warmth, breathless, pulsing warmth, as though the walls remembered the shape of a body held too long. The diary lay exactly where she'd heard it would. Altar cloth beneath it, wax melted at the corners. She did not dare touch it. She used her veil, folded twice, lifted like relic. Page 4 had turned itself open. She swore it. The chant had no melody, only meter. 7 strokes per line, 11 lines per verse. The syllables twisted the mouth into silence. We do not sleep, we do not cry. She threads our gums with lullaby. The cradle breaks, the voice is dry. We do not speak, we do not die. Each line was broken by small, pale objects embedded in the soot like bone in old bread, not drawn, pressed, human teeth, milk teeth. At least 30 some cracked down the middle. They were arranged not like letters, but like punctuation, to stop breath, to catch thought. They dotted the chant like offerings. Tiny absolutions. Sister Benedicta stepped back. Her shoes left no prints. The soot recoiled. She heard something then, not aloud, but inside the skull, like the echo of a lullaby she had never been taught. She looked at the page again. Beneath the chant, carved into the vellum with something blunt, perhaps a bitten nail, was a name. Sophronia, and beside it, in smaller strokes, she took our tongues and called it peace. The light dimmed, though the lamps had not been lit. Something shifted in the timbers above. A breath, a drag of fabric. The attic was watching. No, it was remembering. Benedicta dropped to her knees, not in prayer, but collapse. Her knees struck the old planks, splitting the flesh. She did not bleed, only shook. A single sound tried to escape her throat, wet and rasped, as if it came from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Mother She had seen the name once, buried in the annals, never spoken aloud. A music mistress, or was it penance? The records disagreed. One line described her as mute by devotion, another as eloquent in correction. She'd vanished in 1914. No body, no letters, only a veil left in a locked confessional, pierced by embroidery thread, still stained red. Benedicta rose on trembling feet. She reached toward the altar, toward the diary, but the page turned again. Not by her hand. Now page 5 stared back. She did not read it. Not then. Her eyes fixed instead on the wax seal, resting at the edge of the cloth. Not melted, fresh, pale pink, smooth, and marked not with a crest, but with a pressed object, a baby tooth. She began to weep. From the far end of the attic, something responded, a scraping, like nails drawn slowly across rope. Not wood, not metal, rope, taut and wet. She turned toward it, but there was only the far wall, where the plaster had cracked in the shape of a cradle. The scent rose then, milk, long spoilt, curdled in a tin cup left beneath the altar, and behind it, the dry iron scent of heedless blood, old Neil bled. The air became thick, not choking, but full, like being watched by something that once believed in God. Behind her, the icons watched from cracked wood. Their eyes had been scratched out, not defaced, but removed with intention. Only the mouths remained. Benedicta stumbled from the attic, down the stairwell, her veil soaked with sweat. In the chapel corridor, she passed Sister Magda, who said she looked like someone trying to be silent. She told no one what she saw, but that night, in the linen closet, she bit down on her own knuckle until the bone showed white. A week later, one of the young postulants, Eleonora, was found asleep before the sanctuary gate, clutching a hand-stitched veil threaded with white embroidery. At first, it seemed devotional, but Sister Magda noticed the thread was wrong. Too smooth, translucent. She pulled it loose, and it broke at the root like hair. The next morning, Eleonora could not speak, not from fear. Her tongue was gone, no blood, no wound, only a line scrawled beneath her cot in blackened ash. She sings to us through the holes. The convent doctor wrote it off as delusion, said the girl must have harmed herself in sleep, but no blade could have left the mouth untouched. No tool could have sealed the wound so soft. Benedicta knew the truth. Some psalms were meant to be heard only once. She returned to the attic 3 days later, alone again. She did not knock. She did not cross herself. She entered as a child might enter confession, mum prepared. Already guilty. The diary was gone. In its place, a torn page nailed to the altar with a bone pin, thin as a milk tooth's root. On it, nothing but one line, smudged, but still legible. We sang so sweet, she named us choir. Benedicta touched the page. It was damp. When she pulled her hand away, 3 teeth fell to the floor. They were not hers. She took our tongues and called it peace. They called him small for his age, though Abel Ernak had never seen the numbers written. 10 or 12, maybe. He counted only by winters, and the one in 1913 came early, hard, sharp as a nun's ruler, sealing the dormitory windows in ice, and lining the chapel bell with frost so thick it rang like bone. He was a silent boy, though not by vow. The other novices whispered that he'd once spoken out of turnabout, the black veil that moved on its own in the sacristy, about the voice in the chimney that repeated his prayers backward. After that, he didn't speak much at all. He hummed, instead, soft, tuneless murmurs, like something remembered too long and with too much shame. On the last day he was seen, he'd been assigned altar duty, which in winter meant soot. The hearth behind the pulpit sealed now, but once used for warmth had belched black for a week. Sister Agnes said it was the devil being boiled out. The boys laughed, except Abel, who stared too long at the smoke and said, almost kindly, "No, it's not him." He spent hours there, scrubbing with holy water and linen, but the ash would not lift. It stained his hands grey, sank beneath his nails like it belonged there. When he looked at the hearth, he saw something moving in the stone, not behind it, but within it, the outlines of fingers, perhaps, or mouths, opening, closing, waiting. No one questioned his absence at supper. That week had been bitter, and children vanished, often sent to confession, or taken into prayer chambers for correction, though no one returned cleaner. Some came back quieter, others not at all. But when they counted beds the next morning, and found his untouched, the silence bent differently, as though the air itself had noticed something missing. Father Wojtek said Abel must have wandered during the blizzard. The storm had been cruel. Trees cracked like knuckles in the night, and the bell had rung twice. No wind, no clapper, But he told the boys not to fear. God watches the small ones closest, he said, especially when they disappear. They searched only once. The search ended when Sister Radka found the child-sized prince not outside, but in the attic stairwell, leading upward, bare feet, ashes-smeared, no melting snow. The trail stopped just before the nailed door. Above it, the scorched hymn flickered like it had been breathed on. They said it was impossible, that he would have needed a key, that no novice had access to the upper floors, that the soot must have been old. But Sister Radka never entered the dormitory again. She took to sitting in the chapel after dusk, fingering the beads of her rosary, until her nails bled. No prayers, only humming Abel's tune. Inside the attic, the soot had changed, the pattern of it. On the floorboards, new shapes, new smears, hands, child-sized, dragging inward from the door. And on the far wall, beneath the nailed icon of St. Lucia, someone had pressed soot into words with careful, shaking fingers. I was too loud. I remember now. They kept that wall hidden, painted over it, then plastered it entirely. But even in 2023, during restoration, the words rose again beneath thermal scan. The temperature spiked around them. Child height, still warm. Back in 1913, no burial was held. Father Wojtek said there was no body, and to bury a name without death was to tempt damnation. So they erased it. His linens burned, his hymnal given to another boy, his chores reassigned. But the ash stayed. It coated the base of the altar in thickening layers. It smeared onto candles, even unlit. One morning, a crucifix was found hanging upside down above the font. When asked, no one claimed it. But two novices began speaking in dreams. One named a woman they had never met. Sophronia Abel had written her name, once, in soot on the back of a torn psalter. No one knew how he'd learned it. No, none alive bore it. Not anymore. One novice claimed she saw him again 8 days after his vanishing. Said she woke to find him standing by her bed, hands cupped with ash, like he was offering communion. But when she blinked, he was gone. Only her tongue had turned black. She was sent away that morning, wrapped in wool, singing his hum in reverse. The attic stayed locked, but some nights the door seemed ajar only slightly, only for those who already feared it. Novices said they heard weeping, not loud, not frightened, just tired, like someone still practicing the penance they'd been given long ago. And still, no one spoke his name, until the floor of the sanctuary split cracked in a perfect crescent, right where he'd scrubbed the soot. Below, hollow space, bricked, hidden, and inside it, a cot, too small for most children, a cloth veil chewed through at the hem, and scattered across the stone, pressed into the mortar like relicstini, fingerprints in ash. 10 of them, some smeared upward, some reaching. No bones, no skin, but in the dust, a hymn written without ink. If I am still, I am holy. If I am clean, I am gone. The bishop ordered it resealed. This never happened, he wrote in the seminary log, but every week, the bell tolled once. Always, once. Always in the moment between breath and frost. And on the latest scan of the attic, done in sprinkling air, no fires there remained. The imprint of a small boy kneeling, hands cupped, head bowed, as if awaiting forgiveness. Still warm. No one recorded his scream, only the hymn he hummed. The statue stood in silence above the altar, always watching, never bowing. Saint Carol, patron of orphans, frost, and quiet deaths. His face was young, carved far too smooth to be holy. His eyes tilted downward in sorrow that never softened, sculpted from Czech limestone, darkened over time with soot that no servant's hand could wipe away. It began again during the winter of 1914, when the frost returned before the feast of St. Ambrose. Sister Aurelia had been sweeping the transept floor when she noticed the light, fractured, as if bent by a prism, filtering through the stained glass not with color, but with pallor. She looked up. The statue was weeping. The tears were not clear. They streaked dark down Carol's cheeks, staining the stone with rust-colored trails. She reached for a cloth, but stopped when she smelled it iron, unmistakable, not wine, not water, blood, thin, aged, and wrong, not fresh, but not cold either. She turned to call someone, but the nave was empty, though she remembered 2 altar boys had just passed through. Their hymnals lay forgotten near the font, pages warped from moisture, the ink running not from water but something thicker. The first time Carol wept, in the records, was 1842. That winter, 5 postulants were lost during a snow pilgrimage. Their bodies were never found. The snow never lifted. The statue had wept for 3 days. The bishop at the time called it miraculous grief. He ordered no investigation. The next spring, he resigned. The convent burned 2 months later, and still, Carol stood in the silence of the chapel. Aurelia stepped closer. Her slippers left no sound. The dust beneath her feet felt damp. She saw the statue's eyes, not glass, not paint, only stone, but something inside them shimmered, almost like movement, a ripple, a film of something breathing behind the veil of limestone. The tears continued, each slow and even. She counted 7 before turning away. That evening, the wind struck like a psalm shouted backward. The frost entered through the smallest cracks. The old priest found his bed iced over, though the fire had been kept. Candles burned blue at their tips. The bell rang once, then again, but no hands had pulled the rope. It had frayed and broken. In November, no one replaced it. That night, a novice vanished. Livia. She had been praying beneath St. Carol when the others went to evening meal. Sister Magda said she saw her kneeling, head bowed so low it nearly touched the floor. Her lips moved, but no sound escaped. When they returned, only the kneeler remained, soaked through, dripping rust down the legs. Aurelia did not speak of it, but she began leaving milk by the statue's feet each morning. A superstition from her village, milk for the sorrowing dead, to ease their ache, each cup spoiled by dusk, thick and clotted. One evening a tooth was found floating inside it, small unrooted. No girl claimed it. Then the veil began to fall. It started with the tapestries, ancient and red, embroidered with the lineage of saints. They drooped, shifted, draped down toward the altar like mourning shrouds. The wind did not cause it. There was no wind, but the cloth reached downward, toward the chalice. Beneath Carol's eyes, a sound began, not a hymn, a low murmuring, breath over stone, as if someone beneath the floor were trying to confess through the cracks. The priest heard it during Vespers. He dropped the censer. The smoke rose in one clean line, and then broke like it had hit something invisible, something breathing just above the marble. That was the weak sister. Aurelia found the hidden door, behind the sacristy, where the robes were kept. The wall had been patched with a strange wood, darker, mismatched. A hinge peeked through beneath the crucifix. She pressed it. The door opened without creak. The passage was narrow, just wide enough for a child. Inside, a staircase wound downward, not up, as she expected. And at the bottom, silence, the kind that listens. She carried a taper. The walls were carved with names, scratched into stone with fingernails. Most unreadable. One repeated. Carol. 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 Below, she found the source of the tears. Not water, not miracle. A basin, carved from the same limestone as the statue, sat directly beneath the altar. Above it, a thin pipe, rusted shut. But beside it, a blade, curved, ritual, coated in something dry and brown. There were cloths, 2 veils, rolled tight and used, some still wet, a child's shoe, burned at the heel, and on the wall, a prayer. He cries for us, so we don't have to. Aurelia did not scream. She couldn't. She bit her own lip until it cracked. She emerged before dawn, face pale, hair wet. She left the chapel without confession. She did not speak for 3 days. On the 4th, she returned with a ladder. She climbed to St. Carol's face. The stone was cold, but the tears were warm. One drop hit her wrist and left a stain that would not wash. She reached behind the statue, hands searching the crown. She found something pressed into the seam between head and halo, a tooth, human, small, smooth, and behind it, a cavity, deep enough for breath, lined in cloth. She pulled it free. It unsprung like a tongue, threaded with rosary beads. Tied with hair, and at the end, a hymn, stitched into the fabric with blood-dark thread. Let the cold take all but the song. That night, the frost lifted. Only in the chapel. Nowhere else. Sister Aurelia began to pray beneath his bleeding eyes. Every night, without fail. And for the rest of that winter, she remained untouched. Her hands never cracked. Her breath never showed. Her skin stayed warm. Others were not so spared. 3 girls lost to fever. 2 boys found with ash in their mouths. And a nun who carved a silence into her chest with communion knives. Aurelia stayed warm. They say St. Carol wept last in 1971. After that, the stone went dry. Until the diary was found. Then, the streaks returned, not visible to the eye at first, but beneath infrared, the trails showed iron, not old, not rusted, fresh, and someone had placed a small white object in the cup of the statue's stone. Hands a tooth, still warm. She prayed beneath his bleeding eyes, and the frost never touched her. The jar was found behind the bread cupboard, swaddled in altar linens, and set within a shallow bowl of salt, not hidden well, as though it wanted to be discovered. The glass was old, thick, the kind used to hold preserved fruits or sacristy wine, but this held milk, pale, unspoiled, and beneath its surface floated threads of gauze, curled like sleep-dash hair. No novice claimed it, no sister remembered placing it, but when Father Horvath lifted the lid, the smell rose like breath from a crib, warm, sharp, half-sweet, not sour, not yet, but waiting. They gathered in silence, as if before relic. One postulant wept, another bled from the nose. Without reason the jar was sealed again, moved, placed beneath lock. Still, it sweated through the glass. Sister Jana had watched from the far end of the hall. She had seen jars like that before, in her grandmother's attic, beside a cradle that no longer held a name. The old women used to say milk remembered what mouths could not, that it soured only when the truth was ignored. She had been a novice once, too, long ago, before they took her voice for laughing during Vespers. The nun who punished her had since vanished, not died, vanished. Jana had never spoken of it, but that winter she began humming again, softly, the same lullaby she wasn't sure she'd ever learned. In the attic. Page 11 of the diary began to stain. It bled upward from the edges, soaking the soot. The ink, if it was ink, curled back from the lines, like flesh refusing flame. Beneath it, a chant appeared. Milk to hush the stones. Milk to quiet names. Milk before the floor forgets. At the bottom of the page, a sketch, crude, finger-drawn. A child kneeling before a jar. The jar opened, something pale leaking into the cracks of the wood. The next day, the stones beneath the lectern shifted, not loud, but enough. A sound, like wet cloth dragged over bone. The crucifix tilted half a degree to the left. No one adjusted it. They left the chapel early. By dusk, the milk had curdled, but the gauze remained clean, as if the cloth had drunk something it needed. Jana returned to the kitchen that night, holding a candle in one hand and her breath in the other. She passed the pantry without looking. She moved to the cellar. The walls there had begun to breathe. Again, slow exhales through old mortar. Dust rose without reason. In the corner, a stain, not dark, just wrong, like something had pressed its face to the stone and stayed there until remembered. She knelt. She didn't know why. The ground felt warm. Behind her, the jar cracked. The next morning, the linen wrapped around it was damp, not from the milk. From something else, a clear liquid that smelled like metal and teeth. The postulant who discovered it refused to enter the refectory again. She claimed she saw a finger pressed against the inside of the glass. No one believed her, but they burned the cloth anyway. And still, the milk returned. 3 more jars in 3 weeks, always in different places, always wrapped in cloth meant for baptism. The youngest novices whispered of a girl who walked barefoot at night, holding a jar to her chest like an infant. She hummed to it, rocked it. Sometimes, they said, she wept, not loudly, just enough to make the salt on the floor taste like blood. They described her veil to long for her shoulders, stitched at the hem with red thread. No one wore red. No one under vows. Jana found another jar beneath her cot. This one had teeth. 6, suspended like prayers in cream. Milk teeth. Human. The kind that fall loose without violence. She did not cry. She placed the jar at the foot of her bed, slept facing it, dreamed of being nursed by a woman without eyes. When she woke, the stone floor beneath her had darkened in a perfect circle, damp but not wet, and her feet were coated in ash. The diary added a line on its own. She feeds the house. By the week's end, Father Horvath was gone. They found him 6 days later, beneath the east stairwell, curled like a child, mouth open, tongue missing, a ring of salt around his body, disturbed at only one point, as though something had crawled out, not in. His fingers were soaked in milk. The jar was nearby, empty. The bishop sealed the cellar. He declared it devotion gone astray. No further explanation, no exorcism, just silence. But Jana saw what the milk had done. She saw how the stone changed, grew soft at the edges, how the floor beneath the altar no longer echoed, how the children's names whispered through the grain of the pews when no one sat there. One morning, she lifted her chalice to drink. The wine was white. They said it was a mistake, that the kitchens had swapped vessels. She knew better. She poured it back. Slowly, the sound it made was wet, breathing, and at the bottom of the chalice, a thread of gauze. Jana did not sleep. Again she wrote a letter to the bishop, short, final. If the house drinks, let it drink, but do not ask us to sing. She sealed it with wax from the altar, though the candle had no wick. That night, the bells rang once, not high, not loud, but low, from beneath the floorboards. Someone sang from under the chapel, a lullaby. Jana followed the sound with bare feet and an open jar. She knelt at the foot of the altar. She whispered a name she no longer remembered belonged to her, and she fed the stones. Milk does not forget, even when we ask it to. The vow began with snow. It always did. Not the year's first snowfall, but the second, when the flakes turned wet and heavy, the kind that draped the roof in muffled white and blurred the edge between window frost and breath. That was when Mother Sophronia gathered the novitiates beneath the icon of the Annunciation and spoke for the last time until spring. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. "You'll be silent," she said, "for he hears best when mouths are closed." And so they obeyed. Not from belief, not fully, but from the way her fingers rested on the rosary looped around her wrist. Not counting prayers but keys. None of them had ever seen the ring at her waist used, but they had all heard the clatter it made when she passed through the cloisters, as if the locks turned on their own dot. No hymns were sung that winter. No Latin murmured. The choir room fell to dust. The organs were covered with veils. And still, each night, music came from somewhere. Not melody, just that dreadful, lulling tone. One note, hummed through stone. Like a cradle song meant to hush the floorboards. To the girls, the silence was not peace. It was waiting. Marta was the first to break it. Not aloud, not deliberately. Just a cough, sharp and small. During morning wash, she clapped a hand to her mouth at once, but Mother Sophronia was already behind her. Marta flinched, but no reprimand came. Only a nod. That night, she did not sleep in the dormitory. They were told she'd been moved to the infirmary for penance. But her bed remained made, the sheets untouched. A single smear of salt remained on her pillow, shaped like the key that hung from Sophronia's wrist. 3 days later, a second girl, Alzbeta, began bleeding from the ears. No fever, no trauma, just sound forced inward until her head could no longer bear the weight of quiet. She wrote a phrase on the chapel wall before the blood took her. "She turns us like locks." No one removed it. They said the silence would bring holiness, that God lived between words. But the girls knew better. They began to cover their mouths in sleep. They whispered with hands over water to prevent echoes. They lined their beds with salt. Still, the bruises came on the neck, behind the ears, across the chest in perfect little ovals, like keys. They began to bite their tongues in confession. It hurt less than being heard. Sister Veronica kept a hidden notebook, not for gossip, for memory. She said her dreams were going missing, not forgotten, but stolen. She woke each morning certain someone had been there beside her bed, collecting syllables from her breath. One entry read, "She doesn't pray anymore. She listens to the floor." She meant Mother Sophronia. It was Veronica who found the girl in the well. No name or none anyone would admit. Her mouth had been sewn closed with thread from a red stole. The knot was perfect. There was no struggle, only tears, still wet, like she'd been placed there just before dawn. The salt around her eyes had crystallized. They burned the body in secret. After that, the rule of silence was no longer seasonal. It was law. Records from the time show no music. Transcribed after December 1913, the hymnal entries end mid. In the choir book, a page torn out, its corners stained with what appeared to be milk, and yet someone was singing. Late at night, above the dormitory, a voice hummed. Then two, then many. No words, just rhythm, like breathing, matched perfectly. Across different lungs, Sophronia walked the halls with bare feet. She no longer spoke, not even to the clergy. Her lips were pale, her fingertips dusted with ash, and her keys no longer hung at her side. They had been stitched into the lining of her robe. You could hear them rattle faintly when she turned. but she never turned quickly. One morning, Sister Veronica went missing. The note she left was barely legible, scrawled onto a communion wafer with ash and spit. I saw her feed the hymn her own name. They searched the tower. They found nothing, only the diary wedged into the bell's mouth. Page 17 was open. There was no ink, only salt pressed. Into vellum, a hymn formed from punctures, tiny pricks in the pattern of sound. A blind music, readable only through tongue or wound. And beside it, scratched faintly in the soot, "Do not open your mouth. That is how she gets in." The bishop visited that winter. He came unannounced, dressed in a robe he would not wear again. They led him to Sophronia's chamber. When he returned, his eyes had turned glassy, the way wax looks before it takes flame. He removed all the choir children from the records, tore the pages, burned the ink. Only the veils remained. When spring came, no thaw followed. The bells rang once, not from above, but below, in the laundry cellar. Beneath the grates, a veil surfaced in the drainage pool. It was red, lined with keys stitched. In gold. Sophronia was never seen again. No death was recorded. No grave was dug. But when they emptied her room, they found a crib, too small for a child, too warm for the season. Inside, a hymnal, opened to a page that hadn't been written yet. The ink was still wet. It hummed. The quiet wasn't peace. It was permission. No one remembered building it. That was the first lie. The belfry had always been there, they said, chiseled into the sky with the kind of authority only old stone has. But the restoration crew disagreed. The measurements were wrong. The walls too thick for what they held. Behind the altar bell, just out of reach, there was another cavity, and in it, another bell, smaller, unmarked by weather, covered in cloth blackened with soot and crushed moths. Beneath the wrappings, the surface was soft for bronze, almost like skin, pitted, not cast, and inside it, suspended by sinew and silence, hung a clapper carved from a human vertebra. The etchings along the bell's lip were faint, worn by fingernails or time. Initials, dozens of them, many repeating, all cut shallow, none deeper than the smallest breath. The restoration team took photos. Only one survived. The others were corrupted, each file showing the same thing, a blank wall, a smear of salt, and a faint red handprint, too small to be adult. They did not ring it, not willingly. It rang itself. Once, on the first snow of the season, just after dusk. There was no wind. The regular bell stayed still, half cracked and moss-grown, but the second bell, the bone bell, swung once on its own, like something had drawn breath and released it through iron lungs. No one admitted to hearing it aloud. But in the security footage, every frame from 1644 to 1647 trembled, as if the walls had momentarily inhaled. In 1915, 4 boys vanished. The records claimed they left during a storm, seeking firewood, but the diary says otherwise. It says they were called upward. It says one of them, Laszlo, woke with his name in his mouth, but not his voice. It says the bell rang for him. Novice André had been closest to the belfry, stairs. He remembered Laszlo passing by his cot at night, barefoot, breathless, humming something that didn't match any known psalm. He wasn't scared. André once whispered, years later, throat scarred and half-closed. He looked full, like he'd been given something to carry. The next morning, 4 beds were untouched. The sheets were smoothed, the pillows dented as if still holding weight. Beneath one of them, teeth, 3, not child-sized, with the roots burned clean that day. The regular bell was silenced, but the second one, the one hidden behind the wall, began humming at night. Not ringing, just a low, tremulous thrum, like something inside it was waiting to be struck again. No priest confessed knowledge of it, but in the archives, sealed beneath a drawer marked excommunicata, was a single page, brittle and flaked, written, in Latin, cloca, ossium, non tangere, non ornare, non nomina, the bell of bone, do not touch, do not bless, do not name. And below, scratched in different ink, it tolls not for the soul, but for the silence after. By the 3rd week, the novices stopped sleeping. Some claimed they heard the bells hum behind their eyelids. Others began wetting the floor in unison at midnight. 5, 6, sometimes 8 boys, all waking at once with their hands clasped over their ears. One gouged his tongue with a rosary bead. He wrote on the chapel floor in spit, "The bell speaks without sound," and it did. After it rang, the rats left the belfry. The wasps built no nests. The wax beneath St. Carol's statue stopped melting, and the icons on the southern transept began turning faintly toward the tower. Sister Antonina was sent to investigate. She climbed at dawn, wrapped in winter habit, her hands raw with prayer and vinegar. She found nothing, only the smell, sweet, warm, thick, like milk left too long on wood. The second bell was still, but in her dreams that night it swung. Once. Only once. When she woke, her hands were black with soot, and one nail had fallen off cleanly. It lay beside her habit, split, like it had been pried from her sleep. That was the night she stopped speaking. The boys never returned. No snow prints, no open doors, only the lingering heat, measured weeks later by a seminary scholar named Vakovake, who insisted the stones behind the belfry wall retained unnatural warmth, even in frost. Thermal imaging from 1993 confirmed it. A child-sized outline, head bowed, curled against the bronze. Still warm, still listening in the attic. The diary flipped itself open. Page 23. Only one line burned into the soot. The bell must not ring, because it already did. And below that, etched deeper, they did not bury her name, they baptized it. By then, the second bell had been removed, sealed in an iron crate, and locked in the vestry, where no one spoke of it. But once a year, during the thaw, it would sweat. Not condensation, not rust. Milk. It pooled in the corners of the box, thick, still warm. This record was sealed by the diocese in 1889. No explanation given. They said the bell marked prayer, but we only heard it before someone bled. There was no opening. The roof was sealed. The beams were whole. And yet the snow fell gently, steadily onto the floor of the attic, accumulating not in drifts, but in deliberate, hushed mounds. No window ajar, no draught, no break in the slate above, only cold where warmth once lingered, and flakes that refused to melt. Brother Emile saw it first. He had come searching for rope, though he did not know why. He wasn't on bell duty. The bells had been silenced since Advent, but he awoke with the word rope in his mouth, already formed. He swallowed it, dressed in silence, and climbed toward the attic. He expected dust, the brittle scent of stored linens and hymnal rot. He found snow. It was clean. At first, bright, falling from nowhere midder, as though the beams exhaled frost. He stepped forward. His boots did not crunch. The snow made no sound, not even against his cassock, just the faint tick of flakes on fabric, as though it had been snowing for someone else. At the far end of the attic, the diary sat closed. Frost rimmed the edges. One corner had begun to curl, as if resisting the weight of silence. Emile had seen snow in spring before on mission, in the high mountains. But this wasn't spring, and this wasn't mountain air. This was a sealed room above a chapel that hadn't been blessed since 1929. After the well turned black, he turned to leave, but behind him, another footprint, smaller, bare. It trailed from nowhere, straight to the far wall, where the icon of the infant martyr had once hung before it. Cracked. There was no icon now, only snow. And wood, and something breathing. He backed away. His boots left no prints. Later, he swore the cold had followed him down the stairs, not the air, but the cold itself, like an attention. It clung to his skin, sank into the hairs of his arms, even beneath 3 robes in the scent of incense. He felt it licking at the back of his throat. By the end of the week, 3 more brothers had gone up. None of them returned the same. One wept salt from his eyes until he went blind. Another spoke only in reversed prayers. The third, Father Domenkos, began waking in the confessional, kneeling, fingers bent in a posture no human joint should permit. His tongue had been bitten clean through, though there was no blood, just ice, shoved so deep into his throat it froze to the root. On the wall behind the booth, carved with a dull nail, "When snow touches wood, she wakes." The name Sophronia was found etched beneath it. The attic was sealed again, not with nails, with hymns. 3 boys, hands bound in linen, sang from the floor upward, while ash was rubbed along the threshold. A relic veiled in red, origin unknown, was placed at the center. For 3 nights, the snow ceased. Then the relic vanished, and the floor began to remember. Cracks opened along the baseboards, thin as hair, but growing. One morning the chapel stank of old milk. When they lifted the cloths from the pews, frost bloomed in the grain, finger-sized, each digit curved inward. Snow fell in the dormitory once. Only once, 5 minutes, they found a blanket weighted with something soft. When unfolded, it released a handful of milk teeth, too many to belong to one child. Still warm at the root, the diary turned its own page. A hymn appeared, written in what appeared to be pressed snow. She waits in white. She waits in wood. She waits in the places we used to be good. The words faded as breath passed over them. By 1931, the attic was locked under ecclesial order. The bishop at the time, Martin Hevel, refused to allow entry even as the cold returned each Lent, always with the wind still. That February, a novice named Jacob disobeyed. He entered during the night, clutching a rope of rosary beads, tied tightly at one end, as if for binding. He was seen by 2 others walking barefoot toward the upper stairs, his lips moving without sound, eyes unfocused. He did not return. They found him in the confessional 6 days later, frozen stiff, curled into prayer, his fingers fused into position, his tongue lodged between his teeth, bitten clean through. The snow had followed him in. A thin mound lay on the booth's kneeler unmelted. Beneath it, a hymnal left open. The page had warped, but not from moisture, from salt. One word repeated, in the margin, remember. The seminary tried to burn the booth. It did not catch. The wood sweated frost. The match would not stay lit, so they buried it deep, beneath the eastern crypt. But the snow came back anyway, only in the attic, only when the sky outside was clear. It falls still, without wind, without sound, without thaw, and, if you place your ear to the rafters, you may hear breathing, not hers. The woods, the cold never entered. It was born here. The stone was loose, not cracked, not fallen, just loosened, like breath withheld too long. It was Sister Yvette who found it, though she did not claim the discovery. She had been dusting the chapel baseboards when her finger caught the edge not on dust or rusted nail, but on something soft, as if the mortar had never fully dried. The wall gave slightly under pressure. Behind it, silence, not hollow, but held, like the way lungs tremble before a scream. She pulled it back. No dust spilled, no bones, just a scroll, rolled tight and tied with red ribbon that had long since faded to the color of dried milk. It was not parchment. It was vellum, human in texture, impossibly supple, as if skin had not yet decided it was done living. She didn't read it. She gave it to Father Blas, who passed it to the bishop's aide, who never returned. When the scroll surfaced again, in the archive index, it bore no signature, no title, only one line etched faintly at the top, like someone had written it while still deciding whether or not to speak. I confess, not to be forgiven, but to be forgotten. The handwriting was jagged, not rushed, just uneven, the kind of script one learns when taught alone. The confession began plainly. There are places a soul does not rot. I have buried them. It went on to name no names, only initials scattered and repeating, some smudged into beneath each, a description, poetic and bruised. Th, who hummed in sleep but screamed in the walls. L, who nursed her teeth in silence. Way, who mistook rope for song. The scroll was not long, but the longer one read, the more. The vellum seemed to grow heavy. The ink bled slightly when touched, not like moisture, like heat, like something buried deep in the scroll itself had only just begun breathing. The priest, the author, unnamed, spoke of the hymnal beneath the altar, and the rooms that sing back, and her voice in the bell that never swung, mentioned a punishment, not imposed, but inherited. She chose me as the keeper, not of truth, but of tune. And this, they don't rot when they are sung to. According to the diocese record, what little remains snow, priests were buried at the seminary between 1888 and 1893. A note in the margin of the scroll's archival file, scrawled in different ink, reads, "The attic is not high enough." By the time they reached the end of the scroll, the archivist had refused to handle it again. Gloves melted to the fibers. One assistant described hearing a hum that vibrated under my teeth. Another found their tongue burn, no blistering, just rawness, as if every vowel had been scraped from memory. Sister Yvette did not speak after the scroll was taken, but she began to sing. Low, wrong, not Latin, not Slovak, not quite words, just rhythm, the kind that shapes breath into obedience. She walked barefoot after matins, trailing ash behind her feet, though no fire had been lit. She stood beside the chapel wall where the stone had come loose. She hummed. The others heard it through closed doors, through brick and prayer. One novice tried to speak her name, bit through his lip instead. The scroll was sealed again, but it had begun to stain its case. Not ink, not blood, something in between. The stain spelled no words, but under blacklight, it mapped the shape of the dormitories. A line stretched from the choir room to the crypt. At its center, the confessional dot where, in 1931, a novice froze with his mouth wide open, where, last month, the bell tolled with no rope. They examined the wall more closely. Inside, tucked deeper, were remnant scraps of linen, notched with thread, hymnal pages, folded like prayer, stained with what could only be teeth marks, a braid of hair, sealed in wax, a button from no known habit, and one small object, a key, carved not from metal, but from bone. It fit no lock, but when pressed to the wall, it sang. No one else heard it, but Iveta did. She turned her head, slowly, to the loose stone, whispered a line that hadn't been taught in decades. She doesn't want the door opened, only remembered. Later that evening, the diary turned its own page, without wind, without touch. Page 28 bled slowly from blankness into text. The ink arranged itself into 4 sentences. Each began with the same line. We buried them in verse and ended, and verse remembers. The final line of the confession reads simply, "Forgive me. I built the hymns to hide their names. We buried them in verse, and verse remembers." The tape was labeled Canticle 3, no date, no author, just a strip of linen wrapped around the reel, stitched, not with thread, but with something thinner, lighter like root, or hair boiled clean. When played, the reel cracked once off, like the break of ice under ash, and then the sound began. Not music. Not words. A hum, breathy, wet, as though sung through cloth. The note never changed, only deepened. Beneath it, something distant. Metal, maybe, or bone. Something dragging itself along the inside of a wall. They stopped the reel at the 17-second mark, because that was when the voice joined. Not a woman's voice, not truly, but pitched like something trying to remember what a girl sounded like. The syllables slurred. Fragments of Middle Slovak twisted through reversed Latin. But one phrase emerged, clearly once. At timestamp 022, Nepokujt Ru, a linguist named Helena Brzova, was brought in. She taught translation at the university in Košice, raised by sisters. She knew the sound of silence when it broke. She translated it initially as "Do not wake her," but after 6 days, and a nosebleed that wouldn't clot, she amended the phrase, "Do not let her be heard." That night, Helena stopped speaking. She was found days later in her office, surrounded by tape reels wrapped in altar cloth. On the wall, carved into the plaster with something blunt, she'd written a line 33 times. "If you hear her voice, she remembers you." The diary confirmed it. Page 42, etched in soot, as always, and followed like every page. Since the midpoint with the same refrain, "She must not wake," but on this page, a subtle difference. The final line curled upward, as if unfinished, interrupted, beneath the ash, pressed into the vellum by force, not ink, not soot, just pressure. ATHUMB, PRINT, child-sized, still warm. They kept the reel sealed, but something had changed in the seminary. The bells vibrated, even when untouched. Wax bled from candles in long threads, pooling not downward but sideways, as though gravity was uncertain. And the hymnals, they hummed, not loud, just enough to stir the pages. One novice was sent to gather the hymnals for binding. He returned, pale eyes glassed with tears he claimed weren't his. His fingers were burned at the pads. He held them up and said, "I didn't open it, it opened me." He spoke no more after that. Just HUMMED. One note, the same from the real. The same from the attic, the same from the dream they all began sharing. Always the same scene. A crib, upside down, a child beneath it, not crying, only waiting. The priest who recorded the tape, his name lost, wrote a single line in a margin found behind the confessional booth. "She is not asleep, she is being quiet." And another, "We taught her how." They found the reel's twin canticle buried behind a panel in the old choir room. This one was worse, not because of the sound, because of the silence that followed it. At 0:38, the tape cuts. No hiss, no pop, just void. A full 17 minutes of nothing. But when played aloud, things began to happen. The walls dampened, the choir risers warped, and the diary flipped to its final page, the one never completed. Now, it bore a single sentence, scrawled diagonally across the corner: "You let her be heard." They burned the reels. But sound is not fire, it remains. Helena's voice was detected by software. Again in 2020, 4 anomalously embedded in a security feed from the crypt stairs. She was humming the same note. No source found. The crypt had been locked for decades, and still, the voice lingered. It entered recordings without microphone. It distorted screens with shapes. Not drawn but sung. It passed from floorboards through blood. One postulant began vomiting hymenal small pages, blank but wet, folded neatly as if placed by a steady hand. No one claimed the ink, but beneath each one, the line, "She must not wake." The phrase became rule. It was etched above the dormitory doors. It was whispered during absolution. It was scrawled into the fog of bathroom mirrors by fingers that left no prints. But still, they heard her dot in breathing, in breathles, in ess, in the sound made between floorboard, creaks, in the silence behind the word amen, until one boy, Miro, broke. He stood at the center of chapel during dusk prayers, unclasped his mouth like peeling old wax from altar silver, and said, without force, without tremble, "She already has." And then he sang, "Know him." Just the note, the same note, the one from the reel, from the attic, from the child beneath the crib. Every window cracked, every candle drowned itself, every bell turned once without pull. Miro's body collapsed before his voice did. The voice sang 3 seconds longer. No mouth, just sound. It's in the floor now, under the nails, behind the glass inside. The quiet you mistake for comfort. The reel was never found, because it isn't needed. If you hear her voice, she remembers you. They found the cylinder in the old choir vault, behind a slab of incense-cracked cedar, warped by years of frost and prayer. A child's mitten had been wrapped around it, wool red, singed at the cuff. The reel was marked only with a smear of soot and one etched character. Oh, no label, no date, but the wax smelled faintly of old milk and moth-bitten linen, as if it had been stored inside a throat instead of a drawer. It took them 3 days to find a phonograph that could play it. By then, the seminary lights had begun to flicker at 5:11 p.m. each evening, always the same second, always as the chapel's shadow reached the choir gate. The maintenance logs noted electrical fatigue, but no bulbs blew. They simply dimmed, like something was inhaling through glass. The needle dropped. The hiss began, not crackle hiss, like something just beneath boiling. Then sound, a hymn. Soft at first, childlike, 8 voices, maybe 9, faltering in pitch, the way children do when taught not notes, but fear. It was not written in any known key, but there was structure versus repeating, harmonies staggering toward unity and then unraveling like veins under skin, and beneath it, one more voice, not in the foreground, not meant to be noticed, but unmistakable. Lower, slower, not louder, just older, like breath passed through dust instead of lungs. And she did not breathe between notes. A linguist was consulted, a priest, a musicologist. One described the undervoice as embalmed. Another said it felt like being remembered by something I didn't survive. At timestamp 2:16, the children faltered. One voice cracked, a whimper, perhaps, or the sound of pain masked as a missed note. But the lower voice continued, steady, unbroken. She did not pause for their silence. She swallowed it the next day. The dust in the choir room shifted, not fell-shifted, swept toward the south wall in a perfect crescent. Beneath the stone crucifix, a single tooth appeared on the floor, milk-white, still warm. The diary flipped a page. 47 that evening. There was no ink, only ash rubbed into the parchment in curved strokes, as if someone had written the words with the base of a knuckle. It read, "She does not sing to be heard. She sings to stay." The children's names were never listed. No record matched the arrangement, but one initial R was scratched into the side of the cylinder with something sharp, perhaps a needle, perhaps a nail. Archivist Alia, who handled the audio transfer, found 3 pages of hymnal stuck to the soles of his boots the next morning, burnt curling but with the lines legible. Ash is not the end. It is the memory of burning. He did not sleep again. He began pressing his ear to the confessional wall. He claimed he could still hear the voices, not the melody, but the sound between. Breath turned backward, like wind through a cradle turned upside down. Then he tried to replicate the hymn. He failed, not because he lacked skill. He was trained, but because the notes moved. Each time he sang, they shifted, as if they remembered, as if they did not want to be sung by the wrong mouth. In the third attempt, he collapsed. His hands were blackened. Inside his palms, waxed off, still shaped to the groove of the needle. They kept the cylinder, sealed after that, but the voice bled into the tiles, into the hymnals, into the breath between dusk and vespers, where things used to be still. 3 novices began humming it in there. Sleep.1 was found sleepwalking with soot crusted into the corners of his mouth. Another awoke, choking on fabric, a strip of red wool, damp with milk and frayed at the edge, like a mittens hem. They said the voices were not singing to be remembered. They were singing because they remembered you. One priest, Father Camille, who'd led the choir in 1912, left a letter, found beneath a cracked statue of St. Lucia, her eyes long since scratched to blindness. The letter read, "I taught them the shape of silence, but she taught them the note that holds it open." The final page of the diary, long thought blank, bloomed in heat, not ink, not fire, just warmth, and from it, a verse. 8. Sing to her. 1 sings through. 8. Breathe. 1 does not. 8. Are buried. 1 remembers. The cylinder still plays, even with the needle lifted, even in rooms without power, even with no sound. You don't need ears, just memory, just ash. She never inhaled, she just remembered. The attic smelled of wax and something else older, thicker, not rot, but memory turned rancid. When the workers reached the beams, they saw it hanging there, a length of veil, impossibly black, knotted round the rafters like a noose made from mourning. It dripped, slowly, not blood, not water, something oily, something that didn't dry. Beneath the drip, the boards had warped, darkened into a bruise. They didn't touch it. One of them, Taj, the youngest, said it felt like being watched by someone with no eyes. He pointed to the ceiling, but there was nothing above, nothing but silence, trembling slightly. Sister Radka had been the first to mention the veil. She remembered it from the old ledger. An entry crossed out so many times the paper had thinned. Veil must not be moved. Not again. No name listed. Only a phrase etched into the margin in faint script. She sees with what we leave covered. The diary called her the one who veils the eyes of the living. She was never found in seminary records, not under birth, nor death, nor profession. But her presence was known, through the children who stopped looking at mirrors, through the linens that curled when left too long in the sun, through the novices who woke blind for hours at a time, unable to see, yet still able to weep. They sent for the archivist again. He did not respond. His last message, sent at 3:12 a.m., was one line: "If you can read this, it means she's still blind." They broke the floorboards. Just below the dripping veil where the knots hung like a cradle with no weight, they found her name, carved in careful strokes, so deep the blade had split the beam. Miriam. Beneath it, 3 smaller names: Teresa Eli, K. Otono. No dates, just the names, each followed by the same symbol, an empty circle, scratched until it tore the wood. When the veil was unknotted, the attic temperature dropped. Not cold, just emptied, like breath removed from a room. One of the men slipped, climbing down. His palm caught the edge of the frame. Wax from the veil had dripped onto the rail. When they peeled his glove off, 4 fingers had blistered. Not burned, veiled. His skin had turned opaque, translucent, the color of milk left. Too long in prayer, he never returned. Later, a sound came from the beams. Not footsteps, not scratching, thread being pulled, a slow tug, like someone sewing from the other side of the ceiling. When they returned with lights, the veil was gone. Only the knot remained, and beneath it, 3 small shapes carved into the wood, cradles empty. The diary's ink bled that night. Not across the page, like the words themselves were weeping. Page 52 held a single line. She threads the eyes shut, so they see what she was made to hold. The lights flickered again at 3:12 a.m., the same hour the archivist had vanished, the same hour the bells had once turned backward. Sister Radka climbed the attic stairs alone the next night. She held no candle, only a cloth thread stolen from the altar, meant for the feast of St. Agnes. She wrapped it around her eyes before she opened the door. The moment she stepped in, the door shut behind her. She said she heard singing, not voices, just thread being pulled through skin. She spoke to the darkness, said the name Miriam. The veil fell, not from above, from the beams, downward, like a tongue, an spooling. It brushed her cheek. She wept, not from fear, from memory, because she remembered. The song, not from music, from birth. When she returned, she was veiled, not blind, veiled. Her eyes had turned black, not bruised, but darkened with something beneath. When she blinked, soot fell. She would not speak, but she left behind a note, scribbled on the back of her robe. She sees now, and we have no more thread. The floorboards creak in threes now, even when no one walks. Each time the veil is mentioned aloud, something shifts in the eaves, a soft sigh, a movement of fabric that was never stitched. They say Miriam did not vanish. They say she volunteered. They say she veiled herself, so the children would be spared what she saw. But the veil, Phrays, and the floor remembers, and 3 names are still written beneath the boards, softly, now with wax. If you can read this, it means she's still blind. The seminary choir chamber had not been used since the winter of 1948, when a novice collapsed mid-psalm and bit through his tongue. No explanation had ever been given. The cause of death was written in a hand unfamiliar to the coroner, resonant. Asphyxia. The body was buried in silence. No hymns, no rites, only a note pinned beneath the tongue, already water-stained. She hums when she is not seen. When the diocese finally deconsecrated the building, the chamber remained locked behind 3 iron latches, each affixed with braided cloths soaked in wax. This was not protocol. No key existed. They found the locks rusted shut, yet warm to the touch, as though recently held in breathless palms. The first time they opened the door, nothing stirred. Not at first. The pews were intact, carved with initials no one remembered carving. Dust sat in perfect rings across the benches, as though figures had once sat there long enough to press sorrow into the wood. The light came in sideways, passing through a small fracture in the stained glass window above the choir loft. It scattered onto the stone floor like fractured hymnal notes, violet, gold, the sickly green of aging halos. Then the humming began. It was low, subaudible, like breath, beneath breath, the kind of hum you feel before you hear. And it only began when no one stood inside the room. The workers noticed first. The young man who set down his brush, walked out for lunch, and turned around with his sandwich half-bitten. "Is someone still inside?" he asked. They all shook their heads. He went pale. "Then who's singing?" They returned, opened the door. Silence. Every time they left the room, it started again. Every time they returned, it stopped. They brought in recording equipment, left a microphone on the pulpit overnight. When they played back the tape the next morning, it was filled edge to edge with the hum. No crackle, no shift, just that low, droning hymn, never changing pitch, never drawing breath. For 6 hours, at precisely 4:12 a.m., it ceased. A single second of silence. Then a whisper. Not words. Just the sound a mouth makes when it remembers how to move. The technician quit that day, refused to return. He said the voice was underneath the hum, not part of it, as if the humming were only the veil for something deeper, something exhaled by something waiting. Sister Mira, the last nun still living near the grounds, offered only this. There was once a lullaby. It was meant for children who died without baptism, to sing them from the other side of the veil. The church banned it. No one could find the sheet music, but the frequency of the hum matched precisely the range of the forbidden lullaby. Len ni obseri diotko. Turn around, little one. When the sun passed through the stained glass, it cast a pattern that did not shift with the light, a shape always visible near the center pew, where no one sat. They tested the glass. Nothing unusual, but the shadow remained. Even when the window was covered, a silhouette hunched as if weeping, hands folded into the lap. One worker set his hammer there, just for a moment. It cracked in 2 before he turned back. After that, no tools were left in the chamber, only cloth and salt. They found the first stitch beneath the pulpit, a tiny black thread, looping between the stones. When pulled, it hissed, not a tear, a breath. The walls had been sewn. Thread and wax, ritual and memory. That was Mira who insisted they not pull it again. She sews herself shut when watched, she said. But when the room is empty, she remembers there was no record of the original choir, no photographs, just a single page in a rotted hymnal, scrawled at the bottom in waxy ink. Voices returned, must not be named. One of the names had been burned out. They left the chamber locked for 2 nights, placed a recorder inside again, left a mirror beside the microphone, facing the center pew. When they returned, the recorder was missing, but the mirror was not. The surface had fogged. From inside, someone had pressed their mouth against the glass. No lips, just the outline of teeth, and one word, written backwards in the condensation. Len. They played the backup file. There was no hum, only a faint laugh. A child's cut off before it ended. They stopped all work the next day, but one man returned, drawn by something he would not name. He left a note, folded beneath the altar cloth. It read, "She hums so they are not forgotten. That is all we ever were. A room waiting to be empty." They sealed the chamber again, braided wax around the locks, marked the threshold with 3 circles in ash, left the lights off, covered the window. Still, some nights passers-by report hearing it, not loud, just beneath the wind, a tune no one teaches, a hum no one wants to remember learning, and always, only when no one is there. It was not the ash that frightened Marta, not at first. It was the way it refused to smear. True ash fades, stains, clouds into air, but this held its shape like stitched dust. It sat in the folds of the altar cloth, as if folded there by ritual hands, as if the fire had not touched it from without, but had been sewn inside. The cloth had been locked away beneath the altar since the seminary closed its doors, wrapped in a reliquary box with no saint's name, no inscription, only a velvet ribbon drawn tight and sealed with 3 wax thorns. The box had no key. The wax had not melted. It should not have opened when it did. Marta was not a restorationist, not by training. Her hands trembled too often, but she was allowed inside because she had once been a novice, and Sister Felice believed that memory was a cleaner of sacred things. "The cloth remembers," she said, "but it lets go when someone weeps near it." Marta did not argue. She wept easily. The altar cloth unspooled like a mouth unscrewed. The threads had blackened, not from flame, but from within, scorch marks blooming outward, from the center of the fabric, like ink in lung tissue. Beneath the burns was a sigil, sewn in red, but not with thread, with something wiry, something brittle to the touch. It curled into the shape of a chalice, but inverted, its cup an open mouth, its stem split like a tongue. 3 smaller marks beneath it, children's initials, stitched backward. This symbol did not match any known order, but it appeared, faintly, in the margin of a forbidden hymnal recovered during the 1917 purge. A footnote, scribbled in pencil, Mater Villains, the mother who eats silence. Sister Felice went pale. She whispered something in Slovak, a word Marta did not know, but she remembered how her breath changed the dust in the room, how it fled from her mouth, as though the air itself had grown shy. The cloth was taken for testing. Inside the fibers, traces of marrow, not sheep, not lamb, human, and the burns, too precise, too contained, no signs of ignition, only evidence of heat, growing from the center, as if the fabric had remembered something terrible, and had tried to cauterize itself shut. Marta began to dream. Always the same. She stood inside the old sacristy, where vestments were folded by girls who would never take vows. The walls bled wax, not dripping weeping, and a woman stood in the corner, veiled in black, her face wrapped in the same altar cloth. The hem of it hissed in slow burning breath. Each time Marta approached, the woman did not move, but the walls whispered behind her, a choir of children, not singing, humming, the same 2 notes, inhale, exhale, but the breath never left. One night Marta woke with a ribbon in her fist, still warm, still tied, still bearing ash on one end, and something darker on the other. A test confirmed it was the same as the ribbon that sealed the reliquary. Sister Felice did not speak again. She left the seminary 2 days later, but not before carving something into the floor beneath the altar. Found it only after she was gone. A series of looping, intersecting marks, stitched into the wood with a small communion pin. It matched a symbol found in only one known archive, a sealed volume from 1889, whose contents had been marked Obsidita Maternitas, or possessed maternity. The name Mater Dolens appeared 16 times in that volume, and in all cases was followed by a single note in Latin. Do not let her carry sound. Marta began to avoid mirrors, not because she feared what she'd see, but because every reflection inside the seminary had begun to burn at the edges. Not flame, not smoke, just light, but wrong. Like a face remembering how to become visible. The cloth was brought back only once. To be photographed. But every photo taken in its presence blurred at the center, as though the fabric breathed, as though the lens forgot how to look at it. Only one picture remained intact, a shot of the cloth's underside, where another pattern had emerged, faint, pale against the linen's back, as though it had been drawn in milk, then left to dry. It depicted a child, kneeling, mouth open, not crying, not quite, something to still, to round. One expert claimed it resembled an unborn lamb, another disagreed. A tongue, she whispered, held in prayer. Marta stopped sleeping. She stayed beneath the altar for hours at a time, listening to the grain of the wood, where something faint had begun to pulse, not knocking, not scratching. Just beating. A rhythm too slow for a heart, but not still. One night she brought a bell, small brass, meant for midnight vigils. She rang it once. It cracked. Inside the crack, ash, not dust, not soot, ash that tasted of salt and something floral. Marta did not tell anyone. She placed the cracked bell atop the reliquary and folded the altar cloth over both, and in the silence that followed, she whispered, she made it womb. The next morning the cloth was gone, so was the reliquary, but beneath the altar, where the floor had once been clean, 3 stains, small, oval, dark, and written beside them, in a thin line of stitched soot, they gave her silence. She made it womb. That section of the chapel has never reopened. The floor still warps in winter. The air still smells of marrow. And sometimes, when the lights flicker, not fail, just flicker, the veil over the icon of Mary seems to pull tighter, as if something beneath is holding its breath, or learning to. They say the diary was bound in altar cloth, but those who've touched it say otherwise. They say it hums when read aloud. They say the burn marks move, and if you read too far, too deeply, the cloth begins to warm beneath your hands, not like paper, like breath. The diary had not been opened in decades, not truly. Archivists flipped past the final page, unwilling to linger on the handwriting that didn't match, that slanted like a knuckle pressed too long into damp paper. But Eliska did not look away. She'd spent years deciphering palimpsests from lost monasteries, letters rewritten over grief. She knew what to look for in damaged truth. This page was written with something thicker than ink. The ash clung to the fibers. The blood had dried long ago, but the color beneath was not gone, just darkened into something the paper did not absorb. It had not bled outward. It had burrowed in. She lifted the diary's last leaf with gloved hands. The sentence was written 7 times. I'm still here. Then again, half faded. I'm still here. The 7th was not written. It was pressed, etched with something blunt and heavy, like a nail worn flat with use. Not etched into the page, but through it. It cut down to the binding thread. Beneath it, stitched to the cloth cover, was a second thread. Red, not dyed, pulled from somewhere living. She knew because it smelled. A trace of milk, a trace of salt, a trace of something before decay. She did not tell the others what she saw. She waited until the lights failed again, as they had every night since. The northern wing had been reopened, and she read the final page aloud. The air tightened with the act, not with fear, with attention. The walls leaned closer. The window glass, warped with age, quivered in its frame as though listening to. The handwriting on the page was clearly not that of a child. Each loop was slow. Each letter bore the hesitation of someone, copying, not speaking, mimicking shapes they could not remember, or perhaps trying not to. But between the lines, almost invisible, was another hand, smaller, pressed too lightly to show in normal light, but under the lens of a forensic magnifier. Eliska saw them, indentations, finger width, as if a child had written without ink, or had been made to trace their confession beneath someone else's, a ritual of memory, or of erasure. She brought in a specialist, a linguist with knowledge of pre-modern Slovak dialects. Together, they examined the loops, the phrasing, the age of the particles trapped in the parchment. What they discovered was a cipher, hidden in every third line. The vowels, when isolated, spelled a name, 3 names actually, and each was linked to a birth certificate dated between 1986 and 1992, each one a distant relative of the vanished Novitis, each one currently marked as missing. Each disappearance preceded by a single voicemail. No voice. Just humming. The same unbroken tone recovered from the wax cylinder in chapter 11, only this version ended in breath, a long, slow inhale, then a whisper. You wrote me down. I remember that. Eliska replayed the tape once, then threw her phone into the river behind the seminary. But the message arrived again the next day, written into the condensation on her mirror, not the full phrase, just one word, still. That night she returned to the attic. She brought the diary, a tape recorder, a vial of holy water, and gloves. Not because she feared contamination, but because she did not want the fabric to know her skin. The attic had always been dry, but now it wept from the beams, a blackened veil from the walls, slow streaks like dried milk from beneath the floorboards. Breath. She set the diary in the center, opened to the last page. The light above her dimmed, not failed, but pulled inward, as if swallowed by something not yet shaped. And from beneath the attic's north corner, a hum, the same pitch as the lullaby, only this time it cracked midway through. As if the breath beneath it had been broken, Elizabeth did not move. She placed her palm over the final sentence, felt the heat there, not warmth. Heat. The page began to rise beneath her touch, as if air was building beneath it, not from the room, from within the paper itself. A pulse, one beat. Then again, and then, beneath her palm, the ink began to move. She pulled back, the words uncurled, not the full sentence, only one word. Still, it blinked, then vanished, and in its place, something new scrawled, not with ink, not with ash. But with wetness. Something that glistened, something not from the page, a single name, her own, written backward, and beneath it, you saw me. The veil above her began to sway. No wind, just breath, then a sound, a long, low exhale, but not from her mouth, from behind the walls. A confessional groan. The same sound reported in 1931, when the novice was found frozen in prayer, tongue bitten through. She turned. The attic's western wall cracked open at the corner. Inside, something pulsing, not alive, but remembering. She stepped closer. She should not have. Beneath the boards, a second diary, smaller, stitched shut with threads, identical to those used in the altar cloth. She lifted it. It was warm, and inside, only one page remained untouched by age. On it, the first sentence ever written by the child, scrawled in a smaller hand. I am still here. Then, beneath that, in fresher blood, but she is not me. The lights failed. The veil dropped. The attic sealed itself again. They found Eliska's recorder weeks later. The tape ran only 17 minutes, but in it, she does not speak. She writes, the sound of charcoal on paper, the rhythm of an adult hand mimicking a child's, and at minute 16 the tape hums, a new voice, layered beneath hers, not young, not old, just waiting. Then, someone kept writing, long after the child was gone. The final sound on the tape is not a scream, that it's a name, not hers but yours. They said the bell was inert, that its clapper carved from vertebra had long since fused with rust, its tongue silenced by time and soot. They said no one entered the tower, that all keys had been surrendered, but all pulleys were cut. They said the attic was empty. But still, on January 3rd, just past the hour of 3, the bell rang once. Not a chime, not a toll, a breath, struck through iron. The sound should not have traveled, and yet it moved through walls and wires, gliding, beneath closed doors, seeping into earbuds and static screens. 3 restorers dropped their tools when it came. 2 cried. 1 stood still for 8 minutes and bled from her nose. The footage came later. 1 static shot from a mounted security feed, half blinded by dust. It showed the belfry floor, broken wood, discarded nails, a spill of ash no one recalled sweeping. There. And in it, a figure. Small. Kneeling. Faceless in the grain. The ash curled toward her like breath returning to a body. In her lap, the diary, its cover, altar cloth, its pages, open and blank. But something had been written, not with ink, not with hand. The ash had shaped itself into a single word. Still, by the time they reached the bell tower, it was gone. Not the bell, not the ash. Her. Only a single black veil remained, clinging to the iron rung, like something dried in warning. An oil-dark stain marked the floor where she had knelt, and beneath it, under cracked tile and splintered beam, a patch of parchment, half-burnt, half-breathed. Eliska. Read the fragment aloud before she realized she was reading. The words sounded old, but her throat gave them shape too icily. Silence is not sleep. It is the hunger before it. She did not sleep that night, nor the next. On the third, she returned. Alone, she brought no camera, no recorder, no gloves. The veil remained where it had fallen. She did not touch it. She knew better now. She felt better now, or rather less. The climb was slower this time. Every step groaned, but not with age. With memory. There were scuff marks in the stone. Small. Childlike. One set descended the spiral. Half smeared. One went up, dragging something behind. She reached the bell at dusk. The air was warmer here, but her breath still showed. Light from the broken pane fell in narrow shafts across the floor, illuminating nothing. The shadows refused. She stepped into the ash ring. It no longer held shape. No figure, no kneeling trace, but something watched. She looked up. The bell above her did not move, but beneath it, tied to the rope stump, a new weight. A rosary, its beads carved from teeth, its crucifix scorched, its chain warm. Iliska touched the diary. Its cover no longer felt like cloth, more like skin that had learned stillness. The first page had rewritten itself. She did not read it. She could not. The words had been carved, burned, then healed over. But the second page was blank. Waiting. She picked up the charcoal fragment from the floor, damp with something unnameable. She began to write. Not her own words, not the child's, but something between. Her hand trembled, but the lines did not. They knew the shape. She paused only once, when the bell trembled above her. Not a ring, not yet, just the soft clatter of its bones shifting. Something had moved it, not pulled, not pushed, remembered. She heard humming, low, wet, unbroken. And beneath it, whispering, no tongue, no breath, only intention. I do not need the page, it said, but you do. She dropped the charcoal, but her hand kept moving, fingers twitching, drawing with nothing, the paper stained, where she touched, not from ink, not from blood, but from something colder. Like memory's marrow. She looked down and read. It was her name, but older. Wrong. Bent by time and guilt. She had been here before, long before she dropped the diary. It did not fall. It landed as if caught, as if welcomed. The veil behind her twitched, air pulled inward. The bell above her split, not cracked, parted like skin to long kept shut. And through it, a breath. The same tone from the 1912 cylinder, but deeper now, more awake. And then she saw it etched into the inside of the bell's hollow. They didn't bury her name, they baptized it. The rope moved, no wind, no hand, only the weight of memory. And then it rang. Once, like the first sob of a child who had been silent too long. Every window in the seminary shattered below. In the chapel, every statue wept. Not blood. Not water. Milk stale, grey, warmed by something long denied. She did not cover her ears. The sound was not loud, but final. It echoed in the lungs, more than the halls. And when it faded, something answered, not from the belfry, from the attic. A voice. Childlike. But not young. I'm still here. She turned. The diary was open again, but the page no longer blank, written across it, in a curve that bent like him, right with me. She did not descend the tower. She did not call the others. She did not leave the ash. When they found the room. 3 days later, she was gone. Only the veil remained, tied in a knot, stained with breath, and in the bell's hollow, where her name had not been, it now was written not in ink, nor soot, but light, somehow burned into iron. Eliska. And below it, pulsing, visible only when no one watched. Still. It was always winter when the hum returned, not loud, not even sound, precisely more like the aftertaste of music. Parents dismissed it as power lines or wind against the eaves. But the children knew. They heard it with their teeth. One child, a girl of 7, newly moved to the edge of the valley, began to hum it in her sleep, not nightly, only when it snowed, and only when no one was watching. Her mother found her once, sitting up in bed, with her hands folded wrong, thumb locked beneath the others, wrists too stiff to be natural. Her mouth moved without breath. The tune was jagged, half crushed like something once beautiful, now buried. That same morning, water seeped through the corner of the basement wall. When they cut it open, there was no pipe, just stone, pitted, blackened, marked. The stain did not spread. It shaped into letters, letters into words, soot, written in a child's hand. I'm still here. The family moved, quickly, quietly. The next tenant never saw the marks, not on the wall, anyway. But one evening, while setting mousetraps, he pried up a floorboard near the furnace and found something tucked beneath the beam, a cloth scrap, black, matted with salt, and stitched into the seam, with thread the color of dried milk. Do not listen when you are alone. That night, the humming started again. He boarded the house and fled. 2 winters passed, no tenants returned, but, in the town's one elementary school, 5 children began singing a song at recess. Each swore they'd never learned it. Each claimed to hear it in dreams. None could describe the voice, only that it wasn't theirs. The seminary, now buried in paperwork and reconstruction efforts, remained sealed. Its attic entombed once more. Nails driven by hand, hymns recited by rote, but no salt was used, and no names were spoken. Not the true ones. In January, a researcher from Bratislava visited to review climate damage. Her name was Lenka. She did not stay long. The trip should have taken 2 days. It took 1. She arrived silent and returned, changed, not panicked, not disoriented, just quieter. Her colleague noted her eyes seemed wet, as though just finished crying. Though her cheeks were dry, her recordings from the attic were blank, but the spectrogram showed movement at the exact frequency of a human breath, drawn in reverse. The night after her return, Lenka burned her field notes. She slept in the hallway. She placed stones in her mouth before bed so she would not hum. 1 fell out before dawn, and she did. 3 houses down, a child stirred awake and whispered, "She's behind the wall again." When asked who, she bit her tongue deeply, but smiled. Lenka disappeared on February 4th. No note, only the recorder, left on the seat of her car, with a single file still running. No voice, only breathing, and beneath it, a knock. Slow, rhythmic. Not on wood. But on stone. 3 beats, a pause, then 3 more. The same cadence found beneath the chapel floorboards in 1913. The same found stitched into the hem of the altar veil. The same heard under water in the old font, before it cracked. 3. Pause. 3. The rhythm of breath, learned too late. A priest from the new diocese reviewed the file. He left the church 2 days later. His only statement, "We nailed the wrong door shut." And still, every snowfall, the children, HUMMED, don't know words, only the tone, never the same pitch, but always the same shape. And when asked to stop, they wept, not loudly, not with fear, but with something closer to grief, like forgetting the name of someone you promised never to forget. One mother, desperate, played recordings of hymns at bedtime to drown the sound, but the melody shifted, weaving beneath each note until it overtook the song itself. She threw the speakers away. The snow deepened, the tune returned. In one home, fresh plaster cracked without pressure. Dust fell in fine deliberate curls, and, written beneath it, carved into the stone wall, the bell did not break. It chose not to ring. A girl named Nina began drawing symbols in chalk, unprompted. One matched the Mater Dolan sigil, lost since the 1800s. When shown her drawings, she laughed. "I'm not the one drawing." "Then who is?" She shrugged. "She was here first." The school shut down temporarily. The snow melted, the humming stopped, until a restoration worker, subcontracted and uninformed, reopened the attic, just to take measurements, just for insulation. He did not go far, only stepped in, held his breath, and coughed. The soot rose around him, and settled on his shoulders like cloth. He walked out backwards, and never faced the door again. 3 days later, he mailed in his resignation with no return address. One line was underlined. It wasn't empty, it was waiting. The attic was sealed again, this time with salt, this time with silence, but the house built 2 miles away, over a ravine where runoff once carried the seminary's ash, flooded that spring, not with water, with soot. From no source, from no drain. It seeped from between bricks. It shaped into words, not written. Remembered the children moved away, but the humming spread. A lullaby with no beginning, a voice with no breath, a silence that pulsed. One girl, the same who first hummed it in her sleep, began to write her name backwards in every notebook. When asked why, she whispered, "So she won't find me." And yet, each time she turned the page, the soot returned, edging the corners, staining the staples. One day, she found a drawing not hers, a bell, split clean down the middle, and in the hollow curve, a girl, kneeling, eyes covered, hands still, and beneath her feet, scrawled in the familiar jagged crawl, "Silence never buries the dead. It raises them."